Thanks for joining us here today at Aquatic AV. My name is Kyle, and I'll be guiding you on how to install our Ultra Saddlebag 6x9 speaker kit into your 2014 plus Harley Davidson touring motorcycle. First things first, let's get our tools in order. You may have most of these tools lying around in your garage, but there's nothing worse than having to make a run to the hardware store halfway through the job. So let's get started. Next, we'll move on to the disassembly of the motorcycle. First, we're going to disassemble that front fairing here. If you are working on a Harley Davidson Road Glide, it may be nice to have a second set of hands to help with the removal of that fairing. Also, you want to be sure to place that fairing once removed onto a smooth and flat surface so you do not damage the paint job. Next, we'll move on to removal of the seat and the battery cover. Once those items are removed, we'll disconnect the battery, starting with the negative side first. Then we can remove the gas tank, and last but not least, the center wire cover that runs down the backbone of the motorcycle. Now we can begin wiring the motorcycle. You'll notice on the Aquatic AV harness there is a 4-pin connector. That will be ran towards the front fairing of the motorcycle and be connected to an amp or your front speaker outputs. On the opposite end, you will have your saddlebag speaker connections. The left speaker will be wired green and the right side is wired purple. Once we have that wiring in place, we could go ahead and reattach that wiring cover over the wiring, and we can move on to disassembly of the saddlebags. Now we'll remove the saddlebags from the motorcycle itself. Once the saddlebags are detached, we can remove the lid from the saddlebag. Once the lid is separated, we will cover the top end side of that lid with masking tape to prevent any damage when cutting of the lid. Once everything's taped up, we will attach our template to the lid using the 4 long black screws that are included with our kit into the 2 center holes of the template. Once that's mounted, we could get to cutting. Now that the lid is taped off and the template is secure on the saddlebag lid, we could get to cutting. We're going to start with drilling out the holes specified on the template with a 5/16 drill bit. After that, we could take our jigsaw with a fine-tooth blade to cut around the template, finally cutting through the tabs holding the template to the lid. Once all of that cutting is done, repeat steps on your second lid. Now that our lids are cut, it's time to install the grill and the mounting plate, which will hold your 6x9 speaker to the lid. What we'll do here is we'll take the saddlebag lid and flip that upside down with the grill on the bottom half. Next, we'll get the mounting plate and sandwich the lid in between the grill and the mounting plate. Those 2 items will be screwed together using 4 screws provided, and then we'll be ready to mount our speaker. Now we're ready to go ahead and mount our new 6x9 speakers. With the wiring towards the rear of the motorcycle and using the 4 screws provided, mount the speaker to the mounting plate. You want to be conscious of the fact that the wiring is heading towards the rear of the motorcycle, as this will allow proper wiring inside of the saddlebag to the hole that we will cut. For our next step, we're going to cut and wire the saddlebag for our speakers. The first step is to lay that saddlebag down on a flat and sturdy surface. That will protect the saddlebag for any damage during this process. Next, we're going to need to use masking tape to mark off the section of the saddlebag in which we intend on cutting. From there, we're going to mark an intersecting point, which is 1.5 inches from the front of the saddlebag and 1.75 inches from the bottom of the saddlebag. Once we have that point, we're going to take a 3/4 inch drill and we are going to cut out our hole for our wiring. From there, we're going to place the saddlebag back on the bike, and then we will run our wiring to our speakers through the saddlebag. Be careful to pull that grommet all the way through the saddlebag so that it's safe and secure there and watertight. Now we'll need to route the wiring on the inside of the saddlebag to keep it nice and neat. After we do that, we could reattach the lid to the saddlebag assembly. Once that's all done, we're going to go ahead and reconnect the battery. That way we could test the system. We're almost done. Now it is time to connect our wiring harness to your output source. If you're using an Aquatic AV amplifier, simply plug in the 4-pin connector to the rear output of the amplifier. If you would like to connect to the head unit itself, our CB112 may come in handy. This adapter will allow for the Aquatic AV 6x9 harness to be hardwired into the rear outputs of your radio. Now we'll go ahead and test the system to make sure everything is working properly before we move on to the next step. If you intend on using the RGB feature of the 6x9 kit, now is the time to make that connection. Simply use the 4-pin DIN connector at the top of the harness to connect to the Aquatic AV RGB controller. Once that connection is made, all we need to do is run power and ground to the RGB controller and we'll be ready to go. With the new Aquatic AV app, you will be able to select colors, styles, and rhythms of the RGB lighting in your speakers when you're riding down the road. The next step is to tune our amplifier. First, we're going to turn the gain on the amplifier all the way down to 0. Once that is achieved, we'll go ahead and turn the head unit volume up to around 75%. With the volume at 75% and the gain at 0, slowly increase the gain until the desired output is achieved or until you start to hear audio distortion. Typically, you'll hear audio distortion at around 50 to 60% gain, but please be careful not to overdrive that gain as you could easily damage the speakers, head units, or amplifier in this tuning process. Now that we have finished the installation of the Aquatic AV Ultra Saddlebag 6x9 speaker kit, we're going to go ahead and reassemble the motorcycle. We'll start with putting the battery cover back on the battery, reattaching the gas tank and fixing that to the bike. Then we'll reattach the seat and put together that front fairing. Once that's complete, we'll be ready to go for a ride.